there we are. But before we get started, hopefully, if you guys have seen the invite for this, then you've hopefully seen the news about our first cohort that we launched last week. A lot of those startups are actually here today, and eventually we'll get to start featuring them for some of these events. But really for us, it was a just amazing opportunity to finally show that not only is our community global and really doing amazing work, which we already knew, but more importantly, it's really something that is not only representative of the change that we can make for the ocean innovation space, but really of, especially for Miami, the reach that we have. And I won't go too in depth on what everybody's doing, but just to say, basically we have 8 crowdsourced startups and 2 co-created ventures, where basically we've been able to build teams to help start solutions that we think are going to make a big difference, from seaweed to autonomous boats for cleaning the water, and then bringing together some founders who are doing amazing things, from aquaculture to AI to regenerative practices like seaweeds or taking care of invasive seaweeds to seawalls and more. And so really, to us, this cohort is, when we think about putting our best foot forward to start and show what we're capable of here, I couldn't be prouder, and we're really excited to be sharing that with all of you today. That being said, other people who I think are also just as excited to be here and see the blue economy grow are Sherry Schwartz and Chris Coyle, who, in my mind, as members of the Consortium of Ocean Leadership, I think are going to do an amazing job of showing kind of where things are going from both the policy side, innovation side, economy side, all of the above. I think there's no shortage of angles we can take things today. So I'd love for Chris, if you want to jump in and introduce yourself, and then Sherry will jump to you.
Sure. So I'm Chris Coyle. I'm the founder and CEO of TAO, which is a blue tech, blue economy consultancy. Relatively new to the maritime industry. I've been doing this now for about 4 years. Originally got involved with consulting company involved in the Shell Ocean Discovery XPRIZE, and really fell in love with the space. And so found kind of an interesting niche of trying to connect technology investment along with government agencies' policy to try to move the ecosystem forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Sherry?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So like Daniel said, my name is Sherry Schwartz. I'm a program associate at the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, which is a small nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and I work on the ocean observing team. In my role, I support the Interagency Ocean Observation Committee, and then I also help coordinate a lot of international efforts. For example, I helped to coordinate the program for Ocean Ops 19, which is a decade-old grassroots conference for the ocean observing community and took place in Hawaii in 2019. And then from that, I have this group that started that kind of spun out from it. It's the Observing Air-Sea Interaction Strategy, or OASIS, and I do help them do a lot of community building and logistical administrative support for that as well. It's now a UN endorsed program within the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And last thing I just want to say is that as we talk today, my perspective might be a little bit different from what you would expect to hear. My work focuses almost entirely on the global ocean observing community. And then I'm also going to be speaking from the point of view of an early career ocean professional.
And that's why we're really happy to have you, because I think it's really important, as we have these discussions and talk about what the future of the field is. And I actually was on a call earlier today for GEOS. It's the Global Ecosystem for Ocean Solutions through Ocean Visions. And they're trying to be very intentional about having ECOPs, or early career ocean professionals, involved. And I definitely need to connect you with them. We got to follow up after this on that. But bottom line, I think as we see the future of the field unfolding, us early career professionals need to have a seat at the table as much as those who've been established. And that's something I'm really passionate about. I kind of get a little salty about a couple of different things as I make my make my opinions known. But really, I think it's just a really amazing opportunity where our space is so collaborative and inclusive, and that's where the future of the field is going. So with all that being said, I want to, I think, start with some kind of a baseline question for those who may not know, and really just, again, try to include those who are just starting to get into the field here. So my first question, and Sherry, I'll throw it back to you to start, is for those who may not know, how would you define the blue economy?
Yeah, so for me, the blue economy it's a popular term, it's a buzzword, and I kind of think of it as this framework or this umbrella term that integrates sustainable growth of the ocean and coastal economic systems with the marine environment. I think it should always, when you think about the blue economy, you should always think about encompassing everything from renewable energy to fisheries, tourism, climate change, transportation, waste management, and beyond. It relies on ecosystem-based management models to promote the development of marine industry and technology. And of course, it includes jobs and economic opportunities that emerge from oceans, Great Lakes, and our coastal resources, the proper management of which should always be aimed to result in shifting those resources from scarcity to abundance, and tackling issues that cause environmental problems.
Chris?
So mine is a bit more succinct, and coming from the startup investment angle for the last 25 years. For me, it really just encompasses all economic activities for oceans and seas. Like Sherry, I think a lot of different people have different explanations of what the blue economy. The World Bank I looked up before said it's sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improve livelihoods and jobs while preserving the health of marine and coastal ecosystems. It's quite broad, and I think from an investment perspective, one of the first things that any investor is going to ask any entrepreneur or startup company is, what is the size of the market? And so I think by making it much more broad, it becomes much more attractive to angel investors through sovereign wealth funds.
And I believe I actually, answering that question about the size of the market, I believe I recently heard a stat. It's like if the oceans was a country, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world, I believe. I don't know, these fun facts just come to me.
I heard it was even at 6.
Oh,
it would be
okay.
the 6th largest economy in the world.
All right, I'll get my facts checked on that. I do want to also I meant to give a little quick refresher on how we do things here. So we're going to have these preset questions that I jumped into so eagerly. And then toward the end, we're going to try to leave 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So we encourage everyone to leave their questions in the chat. And you guys don't have to answer them till then. We'll let people unmute to ask their questions. I'll call on people. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring them and calling on you guys as we move forward. So all that being said, I'm going to move on to our next question, and Chris, I'll throw it back to you. When we think about the future of the blue economy, what policies are evolving to support the development of initiatives for the blue economy?
So the last couple of years, there's been quite a bit of legislative activity, both from the House and the Senate, looking at oceans, and covers everything from tribal priorities to coastlines, fisheries, offshore wind, blue carbon, working waterfronts, data and services, marine mammals, Great Lakes, Chesapeake Bay Oyster Research Act. You've got coastal security, and then you've got Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act. But I think we can do a better job. Like most of DC, if you have access, then your priorities get taken care of. But I think the blue economy and blue tech in general is much broader than that. And so instead of expecting DC to create these policies that work for us as a community, we have got to empower Congress and agencies to carry our water for them. And that includes even broader things like incentivizing blue investment through tax credits, reducing and simplifying cumbersome regulations and permitting, promoting state, federal, and regional EDA grants and programs, simplifying contract requirements, accelerating pathways for successful pilots to scale quickly, create ocean-funded investment vehicles similar to DARPA and InQtel, maybe creating a federated XPRIZE for rapid development of data collection, monitoring and sensing, autonomous software and platforms. And then finally, thankfully, finally getting NOP funded at a level that is reasonable to coordinate. I think it's something like 24, 25 different government agencies that have some sort of responsibility for oceans. It's quite broad, and without that quarterbacking, you have one-offs and kind of piecemeal, and it's not integrated. And to me, it's also lacking strategy and focus. So I think NOP goes a long way to trying to curtail that, similar to what NASA's done.
So, wow, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of herding cats there, but I'm glad someone's doing it. I definitely would not have the patience to. Sherry, same question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to build on what Chris said, because a lot of that was just very excellent. To me, I think that strategic policies are going to be pretty crucial in creating long-term sustainable marine economic activities. And we already went over some of those excellent examples of administrative policies. Renewable energy is one area that I see. I also see catch laws that are impacting fisheries, marine sanctuaries that are affecting tourism, and of course 30 by 30, which aims to conserve 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030. And then in addition to those administrative policies, from my just kind of global international perspective as well, there are so many activities internationally that are currently happening. Of course, there's the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And they have this vision with all these buzzwords like resilient ocean, a clean ocean, a healthy ocean. And if we achieve that vision by 2030, we will have a stronger blue economy. There's also the IPCC, which has been looking closely at how our environment affects the economy and vice versa. And of course, there are some new initiatives in the blue economy realm spinning up from that. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which established a dialogue on global climate change and is touching on the ocean, the blue economy. And then I also kind of briefly mentioned some of my work with Oasis, and other projects within the ocean observing community, which are just evolving and supporting the development of blue economy initiatives globally. I think that these policies and initiatives are pushing ocean observations to the forefront of ocean science. And that's, of course, the forefront of the blue economy and helping to change the future of the blue economy.
And just so people who may not know the ocean observation community go, I mean, would you want to explain a little bit about just what that community is and kind of how that ties into the blue economy and some of the future applications?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ocean observation community is very international. There's this kind of like UN governing body called GOOSE, and it's the Global Ocean Observing System. And then there are global regional alliances around the world. So the US-centric regional GRA or Global Regional Alliance is IUS, which is the Integrated Ocean Observing System. And so from our perspective, where we support IUS and the IOC, which is the Interagency Ocean Observations Committee, we think that ocean observations really are the forefront of ocean science because they inform everything within ocean science, from physics to chemistry and biology. And just monitoring the ocean like that helps to inform the basis of the science, which of course feeds into the blue economy.
I also have to say I would not remember all those acronyms. So, one thing I do want to add, is just taking the technical view of that, right? I think there's a lot of, we say open source, right? Open source of data and creating, overlapping data sets, if you will, where people can create smart networks of things. And I think that's where, as an engineer, at least, I see the opportunity growing of how we start creating this global collaboration and global data sets that we can really start to act on to build solutions for, right, or implement solutions for. All that being said, I'm going to move on to our next question, and Sherry, I'll throw it back to you. And by the way, everyone, again, feel free to throw your questions in the chat. We'll be jumping to Q&A probably in another 20 minutes or so. My next question for you is, so what does current leadership in the blue economy look like? Are there any key commonalities in approach?
Yeah, so this is definitely one area where I think my perspective might be a little bit different. Leaders in the ocean observing community are really driving the national and international ocean observing networks that we kind of briefly discussed. And these, of course, serve as the basis for the blue economy. I think that leadership is diverse, international, it's cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral. And while perhaps those leaders and lead researchers might used to be siloed and very separated, that no longer appears to be a case, or at least that is changing. And of course, some examples that I already mentioned were like GOOSE and IUS. There's also the IUS Association in the US, which is the nonprofit side of IUS, and the National Academies of Science. And of course, the UN Decade of Ocean Science is another great example of a leader. For the key commonalities in their approach, I think that leadership is really becoming more inclusive and they're casting a wider net to get a broader set of perspectives that they're being recruited. There's a lot more drive now towards incorporating traditional knowledge in local communities and basically just getting voices who are not typically heard to ensure that they have a chance in saying what their blue economy would look like. And this, to me, for example, Oasis, again, sorry to keep bringing up my work, but Oasis started as a siloed set of international researchers who were very separate. They met at Ocean Obs 19 and realized that they were all working on a similar topic and had similar goals and objectives. They then formed a SCORE working group, got a little bit of funding, and they're now building this international community around those shared interests, goals, and objectives. And to me, that's really incredible. And I really see this as a common method in how current leadership is approaching it.
Yeah, and I think that theme of collaboration is something that is just continually inspiring me and how we drive things at Seaworthy and work to catalyze collaboration. But really, more than anything else, I think, especially for the UN and even some of academia, right? I think there's been a lot of exclusivity to that in the past. And I know one of the fights that I'm making is making sure, hey, all of us people who have been in industry and trying to get into doing more meaningful work, right, are also a part of this, and that we can all drive this forward. So with that, I'm going to throw the same question at you, Chris. What do you think the leadership landscape looks like for the economy?
So I think that it is evolving, certainly in the US. Obviously, we have a new administration. And with that, we have new secretaries. You've got the former governor of Rhode Island, Secretary Raimondo, now leading commerce. You've got Dr. Rick Spinrad, now as administrator at NOAA. You have Secretary Marty Walsh, former mayor of Boston. You've got Senator Kerry as the U.S. Special Presidential Climate Envoy. You have new leadership at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Jane Lemchenko, and then you've got Darren Babrat, who's the director of National Ocean Council, also an OSTP, and where I started a conversation about a year ago to create a high-level cross-sectoral roundtable to discuss blue tech and blue economy and bring in voices, technology, capital, experiences that are typically not in these conversations in terms of policy development. And that now is ongoing with the current Biden administration. But I think there's also a lot of room for better collaboration and communication coordination between ocean clusters, between the work that's being done in the US and the EU and UN, the World Bank and NATO. Coordination between the economists and Reuters and World Economic Forum and the Global Compact, UN Global Compact. There's great work being done, but it's often being done in a silo or in a vacuum. And so I think it's incumbent on our community to drive that acceleration, to tear down those walls, to share information. And I will say, as a brief analogy, about 20 some years ago, when I moved back to New York, there wasn't a very broad startup community in New York City. And so every conversation was covered by an NDA. People were very suspect of each other and kind of raised eyebrows. And I was saying in 20 years, it's become a very healthy ecosystem. And so over time, that evolves. And I think for the maritime industry, my hope is that similar transition and transformation occurs, but we've got to be the change. We can't expect the leadership and the people who have been running these agencies and research in universities to pass the torch. We've got to demand it, and if not, then we've got to create our own path. And so I think the opportunity is bright, but the work is going to be hard, and people have got to be willing to roll up their sleeves. And sometimes it's going to get dirty, but I think if we remain passionate and persistent and positive, great things are going to happen to our industry in the next decade, several decades to come, for sure.
Well, and I think we touched a lot on collaboration, but I think the other piece is accessibility. And really, again, I just looked at the fact that UN Ocean Decade stuff, and again, academia has historically also been pretty inaccessible, and I know I've kind of had that, at least speaking with Emily McGlone at Peaceboat US, which they're like one of the top nonprofits at the UN for ocean space. But I do think that when we talk about accessibility and radical collaboration, which go hand in hand, I think one of the key things is that there are people like you guys who are making these resources available, right? And I think that's one of the key things that I look at is saying, it isn't this, there isn't this wall anymore. It's just having these catalytic connections, and that's part of why we built this network. It's saying, we know if we don't know them, we know someone who does, right? And demystifying the ivory towers, if you will, that these opportunities and resources are housed at. So that's something I'm passionate about. But that end a rant there. Sherry, I'm going to throw it back to you for the next question here. So actually, speaking of policies and barriers, what leadership and policy barriers are there for the development of the blue economy, and how might up and coming leaders address them and catalyze change? No biggie.
Sorry, I was muted. I touched on this a little bit in my previous answer. I do think that leaders are still trying to be more inclusive, but even as they do this, I still think that social and economic barriers tend to be the largest barriers out there. Researchers and decision makers have been very separated and siloed, including in the observing community, and they're starting to work across those disciplines. But on a global scale, both developed and developing nations have access to natural resources and the potential for a really strong and robust blue economy. But the largest barriers really tend to be centered around things like economic viability, which would be infrastructure, national stability, or social equity like corruption, human rights, and things like that. For what up and coming leaders should really continue to be doing, or I'm sorry, up and coming leaders really need to continue to do what has already been started by those that are paving the way forward. This is things like being more inclusive, casting that wider net, engaging with shareholders, communicating effectively. I do think that communication is always key, and to have a very clear message. And lastly, really understanding how and what their economic endeavor would do for the local community, and how it's going to affect the environment, the people around it, its impacts and its benefits. I think that all of these are really important to catalyze change.
Chris?
So I think that there is, there's a lot of overlap and conflict between state and regional and federal policy. There is a significant lack of experience of investment and technology in a lot of these in verticals. And so when we talk about the transformation of agencies, and just take NOAA as an example, they came out with a key strategy paper, set of policies about a year ago, maybe 14 months ago. And that included things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, cloud computing, uncrewed systems, omnics. But to just state those things, which are all buzzwords and seems like the flavor of the minute, both in the private sector as well as in government agency, there is a massive cultural gap between the experience of, say, how NOAA's hired for spatial planning and meteorology and observation that they've done traditionally over the last 5 decades, to incorporate those skill sets in addition to having data and analytics backgrounds and investment. That is going to take some time, and that transfer of skill set and education could benefit across the ecosystem. So you can't just bring in venture capital, private equity, and tech folks when they don't understand the science and research and the complexity of operating in the ocean environment. And you've got to bring educators and research and scientists along to understand that there's a new cadence and iteration that goes on in those verticals that they're not usually exposed to. And how does that tech transfer take that research from the lab into commercialization and forming companies and actually creating new jobs and economic growth for the region and for the country and for the world? We've got to accelerate that now, but we've got to bring in those folks for them to get a baseline of where we are, to then go back and figure out how those institutions and individuals can add value, and then come back and say, here's where we think lessons learned in the automotive industry or aerospace can help the maritime industry. But they've got to be in the room, and I think that's a massive challenge for us, whether trade associations or an industry as a whole. We've got to create that connective tissue. And I, for one, and certainly with COL, is trying to drive that adoption, because one of the biggest impediments is funding. And so the federal government, which didn't have the stomach for a lot of necessary work pre-COVID, we've added, $6 trillion over 15 months. If we don't create these public-private partnerships where we bring in industry and tech and investment and philanthropy and a shared investment and a shared return, we are not going to be able to fund the things that are necessary. And when I went to the White House a year ago, the way that I presented it was, the objective should be national defense, economic prosperity, workforce development, and the expansion of STEM for inclusion and diversity and equity. And if we get those things correct, we should have more than enough money to fund these environmental issues that often are very expensive. And when there's not an immediate return, it's not prioritized. And so, I think in preparing for today, last 2 weeks, we're watching Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson go into space, and interspace travel is valued at $20 billion. As a comparative, and I'm not endorsing it, but if you look at, say, deep sea mineral mining, the initial valuation of that is somewhere around $20 trillion. And that's just in the minerals that have been found. And obviously, like many exploration, the further we find and figure out how to do it cheaply and more with a limited impact in terms of the environment, and leave things the way that they are and have better understanding of the chemical and biological makeup, then you can fund these other research efforts to locate additional things. So the dollar values are significant. How we use observation to influence the insurance industry that desperately wants to create new products, as well as create additional shareholder value for their investors. If by having more eyes and ears in the oceans, we say the insurance or reinsurance industry 10, 20%, you're talking tens of billions of dollars that then can be reinvested in expanding Argo and IOS and these other systems that, again, right now, governments have been leery to invest the appropriate amount. And so if we could create these new financial vehicles and asset classes, that goes a long way to mitigate risk. It brings investors and tech off the sideline. And then we can have a meaningful change of how we can transform and expand, grow the pie, not add more mouths at the table, that makes our country better and our world safer. And certainly having, an 8-year-old son, I'm re-engaged and re-energized in this industry, looking through what those decisions are that are necessary for his life to be better and his world to be better. And I think there's a moral and ethical imperative for us to go do that.
I have so many points that I could jump off there, but I'll just stick to two, which hopefully I don't forget the other one as I talk about it. But the first one was, we talk about the need for science to be aligned with investors, and I think someone asked a question about this, and we'll definitely get to that. I think part of the opportunity that I'm seeing when we build our community, right? Our community isn't like, okay, we build the community and then we go to investors. Investors are part of our community, right? Because I look at money as very much just one of the mechanisms to enable the implementation of a solution. You need the engineers as much as you need the investors, right? We're all just working together because, if the money isn't there, it doesn't get implemented. If the engineers aren't there, it doesn't get created in the first place, right? So it's really, to me, about, including them in this community, and not only just bringing in investors that are already in the ocean space, right? That's the low-hanging fruit, and also probably the lower dollar value, unfortunately. And instead actually educating a lot of the investors who may be creating a bigger fund that are targeting climate tech to realize, oh, blue tech is climate tech, right? And that's something that we're already seeing progress with, getting at least one of the major VCs that moved here to Miami on board. And just, I think in general, seeing people as they wake up to the potential of things like seaweed, for carbon sequestration, having that opportunity. The other piece, and this is just the one little political commentary I'm going to make today, which is not actually that political, is just, I think the cool opportunity, and I think you're obviously working now with new administration, is the oceans don't have a political party. I think it's one of the few things that really still create whatever little bipartisanship there is left, because everyone wants to see a healthy ocean, and if they don't care as much about the environmental impact, there is economic impact that we can create from it. So it is this win-win. And I think I experienced that firsthand when I got to sit down with Mayor Suarez here in Miami. So it's just a really interesting opportunity where no matter what side you're on, I think that we can get people behind it. So, all right, that's my rant there.
Daniel, I think impact investment is going to be key. I don't think that approaching this from an environmental or science or investment, have to be separate. I think they're integrated, and I think there should be the point that is made that there is a strategic value for our country, for our kids' future, for the world. And often that I don't hear that argument being made. And for me personally, I think that's good, because then it is solidified making a pivot in career into the space that I think can be shared globally. And I think that's a great thing. I don't know how we get to climate change without a healthy ocean. And I think most people, when they talk about energy independence, it is an incremental path. I don't know how we don't, on some level, include oil and gas because of their experience working in oceans to get us to that. And I think the smart oil companies now are energy companies. They've already transformed. Others, still need to come a long way. And I certainly don't mean to greenwash the challenges that they've laid. But I think when you talk to, and many of those companies are members of COL, they've got emerging tech divisions. They've got venture capital arms. They know the handwriting is on the wall. And if they don't transition out of what they currently make their profit on, they're going to go the way of the dinosaur. And so how do we use a carrot and stick method to bring our ecosystem forward? And that there are a lot of people. It's not just, energy. There are a lot of people that have been riding on coattails since World War II that need a little nudge for them to get, fear is a great motivator. And I think when you work in the startup, if you haven't sold or, gotten a client by Friday, you generally don't get paid. And fear is not a factor if you've got often military rank or tenure. Your decision making is quite different. Again, not a judgment on what is right or wrong, but I think that healthy blend of both of them does everybody a world of good.
Well, and I'm going to shift to the next question, but my one last comment on that is just that I think the opposite of fear driven is complacency. And having worked for the Navy, I know that is definitely the culture there. And that is all I have to say about that. Next question. Sherry, what innovations do you see driving policy change or catching political leaders' attention in the blue economy?
Yeah, so I see renewable energy as just a huge area right now. I mean, the Department of Energy and NOAA collaborated on their Powering the Blue Economy Ocean Observing Prize, which called on innovators to accelerate technology development through a series of contests. It's just one example. And even within wind and energy initiatives, I know that some organizations are even incorporating 3D farming and vertical farming along with their innovations in wind energy and offshore wind. And that can also support a healthier ocean and therefore a healthier blue economy. I also think aquaculture, which I've seen a lot of innovations around using waste to vertically farm insects and feed fish, water quality monitoring. And really, in general, I think that people are more socially conscious these days. than they used to be, which is spurring a lot of innovations, especially around plastics and microplastics. I've seen, a ball that you can throw in with your laundry and it catches the microfibers so that they don't end up in the water. Algae that can break down plastics and machines that clean plastics from the water. And I think that political leaders it's really capturing their attention. They're seeing what captures the interest of the public and what meets the needs of their constituents. And then when it really comes to driving policy change and capturing the attention of those political leaders and to therefore be effective and support a healthy blue economy, I think that innovations have to be driven by three things, and that's local needs, environmental needs, and economic incentives. I really think it needs to be all three of those in equal parts as well. One example that's kind of close to my heart, because I lived in South Florida for 3 years. I know that Seaworthy is based in Miami as well, so I'm sure this is something on your mind all the time, but South Florida, of course, is on the front lines of sea level rise, and seawalls just aren't going to cut it, in my opinion. I think Miami is built basically on a sponge, and it's sinking, and seawater can encroach into the drinking water and impact septic systems as well. So those are innovations that are going to fix that issue and are going to drive those policy changes and build that blue economy while protecting lives, livelihoods, and that coastal environment from sea level rise. They really need to address the specific local needs, environmental needs, and economic needs as well.
I think that connects somewhat to Chris's comment about fear as a motivator, because, so many conversations I have about what we're doing is basically, well, like, why isn't the blue economy a thing here? Why isn't blue tech a thing here? Should be, right? And now I think with the emergence of Miami Tech, people look at, right now we've been kind of the hub of crypto, but they're like, well, climate tech theoretically should be something we're really about. So, Chris, I'm going to skip to the last question because I just want to be mindful of time and make sure we have opportunities for Q&A. So the last question I have is, what advice do you have for current and aspiring blue economy entrepreneurs looking to drive change in the space?
So one word, opportunity. I think that far exceeds the limitations of our entire ecosystem and the challenges for both technology investment and policy. You want change, you create the change. And so I have to applaud what Seaworthy has been able to do in very short order. And I think if we can replicate your efforts globally, we're going to get to the heart of the problem very quickly. And I think we live in exciting times with all the challenges that we face. I think blue tech and blue economy, just in sheer value, is something that hasn't garnered a lot of attention, both in DC on a policy level and Congress. But I think even more importantly, most Americans don't realize that, our maritime industry is, $500 billion a year to GDP, another $1.5 trillion in economic activity, some estimates up to 20 million jobs if you include shipping and transportation, tourism. It is a massive, massive contribution. It's been part of our country's rich history. And yet we look at maritime, I think, in kind of an antiquated way. And I was at the forefront of internet music with MP3. I was at the forefront for mobile content with ringtones, so I've spent most of my life kind of on the cutting edge of emerging tech, and this is as exciting or more so, and certainly more valuable, and I think also more rewarding than anything ever I've done before. This can make a real impact. And so, it was cool being in the music industry for a long time. I'm not really sure I made the world a better place. May have had people had entertainment for a couple hours for a concert or an album they were listening to, but I don't know if I really moved the world anything. Here, it affects every person living on the planet. And so I think that's as worthwhile an endeavor of any part of my life. So I wish everyone the best of luck, certainly in the cohort, and offer my experience and assistance wherever needed.
You'll get to hear from some of the cohort members who asked questions in a second here. But Sherry, I want to give you one last chance to answer with your advice before we move on to the Q&A.
So I would say to make sure that any change or economic endeavor that you're starting is socially, environmentally, and economically conscious. I kind of touched on this last time too. It should be equal to all three of those parts. Inclusivity is crucial, and communication, engaging with your community and shareholders is important, and just working with the local community, integrating yourself with that community, with local teachers, local government, and just truly engaging as well.
All right, well, with that, we are going to shift gears and move to the Q&A. Priya, who is also one of the members of our cohort, would you like to kick us off with your question?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you, Daniel. I loved your thoughts about how you said money is an enabler, and obviously the ethics and value system Seaworthy is built on. And then, hi, everybody. I'm Priya Guliani. I'm the founder and CEO of IntelliAqua. It primarily brings technology intelligence to the aquaculture industry and addresses the pain points of pond-to-plate supply chain through farm management, disease advisory, and traceability solutions. Thank you, Sherry, so much. What you said about aquaculture, feed management, water quality monitoring was all music to my ears, as that is the theme of my startup. And if we are allowed to have a little bit access to you beyond this panel, I would love to pick your brain on GIS technology. And Chris, I resonated a lot of things that with a lot of things that you said. I think the biggest impediments have been funding. The challenge with industry where we are working is the lack of awareness, and you very rightly pointed that. Ocean tech, fisheries, aquaculture is only limited to events, webinars that are related to this sector. However, we often see e-commerce, retail, and fintech everywhere, right? So why is it not possible to bring this mainstream? And more often than not, I meet investors who have no idea what aquaculture is. So I think that is all it needs to have all our collaborative effort to change that nuance. But my main question, I think, is more for Chris, but open to both. Given the policy regulations, requirements are becoming so stringent every passing year, what sort of companies have you observed get in the limelight over the past couple of years? And how are investors, governments, or consortiums actively looking out for solutions around these issues?
So great question. Yeah, in the US, I think you probably can, on one hand, reference some of the bigger blue tech success stories. So Liquid Robotics that was acquired by Boeing. Clearly, Saildrone is in that same bucket. But even they, I just had a conversation with somebody senior there, and based on a company I was interviewing with last week that was acquired by a private equity company. He just wanted to let it be known that if a private equity wants to acquire a cool company with some interesting, surface or subsea uncrewed capability, they certainly would be open. But then there's a massive drop off between those companies and thousands of fantastic blue tech companies that have got interesting technology, hardware, sensors, software, dealing with aquaculture and the value and need for seaweed reforestation globally. That is a challenge that we need to significantly address, because in the US, if your customer is not the US Navy, for a lot of things blue tech, there is a massive valley of death that's in front of you. And we have got to open up the aperture to industry and other technologies where that capability can be applied into others. And I think to get to the point about your conversations with investors, when I first started talking maybe 4 years ago that I was getting out of the entertainment media industry and going into the maritime industry, and said, blue tech, I might as well have been talking about ant farming in China. People had no idea what the hell I was talking about. They were still trying to get their head around what green tech meant. And so I think as an industry, how we present blue tech, green tech then becomes teal, you add in gray, and then you've got infrastructure. Words matter. And I think one of the things, and Daniel and I have talked about, and Sherry and I actually working on an NSF proposal on messaging. Because if you compare the last 50 years of how NASA and what has just transpired in the last 2 weeks has looked at globally, it is for mankind. It is about risk. It is about adventure. Everything is positive. But if you talk to most people or you read most of the articles about our oceans, sea level rising, acidification, whale strikes, ghost fishing nets, it's kind of depressing. And we failed to promote the vastness and the fact that we know less about, our seafloor than we know about the surface of the moon and Mars, the wonderment, the discovery, the chemicals, the biology that we have yet to find because we haven't had the observational tools to go to the depths of, the Mariana Trench and spend time. And that to me is fascinating. A number of years ago, OceanX was involved in finding, I'm not exactly quite sure what the correct species, but it was like a 60-foot squid that only lives below 15,000 feet. And that kind of excitement. We need to do a better job of putting that out into social media and using gamification and AR, VR. Similar to the space industry using the Jetsons and Star Wars and Star Trek, we've not done the same thing. And so if we can bring in media and entertainment and technology and social media as a way to educate investors in the tech community, we've got to do that. But that requires a whole different skill set and other talent. And I think if we are left scientists to explain climate change, and then in the US, that's what we did, and expect them to be proficient in PR and marketing and advertising. And then now use those same folks to explain the value of the potential of this business and the technology that can be used and what can be gleaned out of that. Most scientists I know, even at the top universities and research institutions, government agencies, don't have a Rolodex of venture capital or tech companies. We can't keep going to the same source and expecting a different result. We've got to bring in other people that are experts in those verticals and sit them at the table and have them come back and say, here's where I can help. That to me is much more productive. It's less of a ramp. It's less of a learning curve. And then they have scratch in the outcome. And that is critical. It's not just about profit. People want to make change and want to be part of that. And that's something we shouldn't take away from them. I think it's key.
Sherry, you have anything you want to add to that?
I mean, Chris took the words right out of my brain. I was going to say messaging is key in that. I think stakeholder engagement or just engagement along the entire pipeline is crucial. Understanding what your stakeholders' needs are, the local community's needs, everything from the local government who's setting those regulations to the end users of your product or service. Understanding everything in that pipeline, I think, is key.
Now this is getting me all excited to get back on the NSF. All right, I'm going to throw it again.
Can I add one more thing on that? I think that it's critical. I've spent the majority of my career when I was in the entertainment industry kind of between content, technology, and finance. And what I found is super smart people in each of those verticals, but they talk completely different language, even though we're speaking English. In certainly in my experience. And so I think in our ecosystem, it's so broad and diverse that we've got to understand that not everyone's going to have a PhD in marine biology. And so you've got to speak to your audience in a way, and maybe this is self-deprecating, but I say quite publicly, and Sherry's heard this many times, probably ad nauseum, is if I can wrap my head around it, then I feel like I can explain to other people because I'm the village idiot. And so often when we're on webinars, we go down these very scientific rabbit holes, and sometimes it's done on purpose. Sometimes it's not really understanding who your audience is. We've got to do a better job and stop using acronyms that keep people uninformed on purpose. In the tech space, it's done all the time because they want somebody sitting across from you to think that they're somehow smarter because you don't know what they're talking about. That doesn't benefit either community. And so messaging is going to be key, using words that are meaningful. And then if somebody asks a question, being able to answer that. I know for the first year and a half I went to COL, I kept my hand underneath my behind because I didn't want to ask every acronym that was discussed, because I didn't want to be, who's that moron who doesn't know what those words are? I didn't want to be that guy. And I felt like I was that guy most of the first year I was in the space. And so I think nobody has a decoder ring, but I think we can use plain, simple language that everyone, we have to make it inviting. I think that's part of the messaging.
I was literally just thinking about how many acronyms I learned being in AUVs, which that alone is an acronym. So anyway, Gabrielle, would you like to unmute to ask your question?
Yeah, well, hi everyone. I'm Gabriel from Brazil. I'm the CEO at SeaTrec, where we do climate change events prediction and monitoring. And I would like to ask for both of you, how do you see the growing impact of the natural disaster in the economy and our society, and the importance of the development of a resilient culture and to deal with these problems?
Say, Sherry, I know you had the Florida angle earlier.
Cool. So I think that natural disasters are definitely having an impact. Obviously, there's that negative impact on the economy and society, but I think that they're also, people are becoming more aware. Coastal resilience in my circles, at least from my perspective, it's becoming a very hot topic. And I just think that innovations to address those issues are going to need to be very specific to the local areas and those environmental and economic needs in those areas.
Chris, you have any little things that I'm trying to make sure we have time for at least one or two more?
Yeah, I think information is power. And so, as I stated earlier, I think that information share is key. I had a conversation just the other day with the head of science and R&D at NOAA, and that was set up for a completely different need than what is required today. And so I think information that is relevant to NOAA's traditional customers is probably valuable to insurance companies to mitigate risk, how they price out their policies for sea level rise and coastal communities. So I think we are at an exciting time that information that wasn't needed before is going to drive a lot of innovation and investment in our space. And I think it also empowers more impactful decision making in real time. And I think that's a quantum leap from, getting ocean observations once every 10 days to, every 15 minutes or every 10 minutes, 24/7 around the world. That gives us a much broader understanding of what our oceans are about. And I think that information then excites and empowers other people to get educated and aspire to make a career in this industry as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to make sure to try to fit in two more. Nick's going to go next. I just want to say Nick and also Gabrielle are both members of our cohort. So it's like unofficial startup demo day. Go ahead, Nick.
Hi guys. Thanks again for just informing us on everything. I had one targeted question with some context. I was more or less wondering, how does environmental justice play in the blue economy policies that are being drafted in the US in relation to its foreign policies as well? And for context, I happen to run an ocean farm in Jamaica, small island developing state. Majority of the global south is more or less excluded from a lot of the climate change conversations, mainly because we don't necessarily contribute to majority of the, the greenhouse gas emissions. And so in this kind of came to me mainly because I kept bumping into issues with like funding as an example, and realizing that, hey, majority of the emitters have all the capital and are not investing it in countries that are most vulnerable. but also aren't providing different levels to allow them to help to fix the problem as well. So I was just curious on your thoughts.
Nicholas, I think you're spot on. One of the first, about a year into the meeting, into the space, I had a meeting with folks at the World Bank and IFC about the value of seaweed reforestation as a first block in coastal erosion, and bringing back fish stocks so that local fishermen are not competing against commercial applications, CO2 capture, oxygen creation, food protein. The challenges that Jamaica faces, and I haven't been to your fantastic country in about 20 years, stayed in a little place called Pineapple Beach between Montego Bay and Negril. And so, the things that we're talking about are just as relevant for developing countries as they are for developed nations, and they shouldn't be separated. Obviously, the funding for the IFC and World Bank separates that, but seaweed reforestation is a global challenge. Anyone with a coastline has been impacted with sea level rise and acidification and water temperature. That's wiped out a lot of these coastal grasses, and so I think it's about creating use cases that are successful on a commercial application level that inspires other investors. It mitigates risk. I think the deal flow in a lot of this is too one-off and too desperate, and people don't know where that information. And so I think these incubators, accelerators, ocean clusters are critical. They've got a fundamental value in making a difference. They can't just throw a program together and then hope it makes a difference. You really got to work at it. You got to bring in mentors and experts. And obviously Daniel deserves a ton of credit, because there are others that have been around for years that haven't done a tenth of what Daniel has been able to do in a year. So I think you were in great hands, and I think there are a lot of wonderful, passionate folks that are both advisors and collaborators, and hopefully we'll get another chance, Nicholas, to chat later, because obviously the needs for your community and your country and your island are unique to Jamaica, but they are also representative of the Caribbean and the Mediterranean and other island nations. And we need to not reinvent the wheel every time these situations occur. And I think, at least in what I've observed in the last 4 years, we do far too much of that in the maritime industry. We need to share best practices, toolkits. How do we convene globally all these things that are being learned? And so when I said, what the World Economic Forum and the UN and the economists and Reuters are doing, there's a lot of energy that is not collaborating. And so everyone in that food chain suffers from that. We've got to do a better job. So I hopefully that answered part of your question.
Yeah. Sherry, I guess a part two to my question is how can we make I guess a blue economy more jurisdiction agnostic, to allow more capital to just generally flow through the globe, as opposed to that concentration that is happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Chris has said. And I think that, like he said before, information and messaging are just communication in general is just very, very important. Some of the work that I'm doing right now is looking at social sciences and the cross section of social sciences and ocean observations. And I think that just kind of that multidisciplinary work as well is crucial. And yeah, I think that's all I can think of right now. Chris, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think I think that covered most of it. Funding, it's not the panacea of solving all of our challenges in the maritime industry, but it will go a long way. And not all money is created equal. And so I think federal funding around the world has been going in the wrong direction. And the only way that I think we collaboratively make up that difference and then bring additional capital is these other funding sources and get foundations that are often, handcuffed by bylaws and their fundraising efforts to not collaborate. And some of that, I think, involves shaming. I don't want to be part of that, but a lot of it is about, if they can get on a soapbox and talk about a problem, then they can raise money. And that goes to their bottom line and salaries, et cetera, and doesn't go to building solutions and products and creating jobs to solve the issue. And that needs to be addressed. We need to do a better job of funding solutions and not just about discovery and exploration for the sake of discovery and exploration. There's got to be an end result of what that funding goes to at the academic and research level to go beyond that. And we've got to be able to assist that community, the PhDs and the scientists, on tech transfer. And there's a huge gap between what's being done at the institutional level and what comes out of that. And we've got to help get universities in that mode. And if you look at other verticals, they've been quite successful in e-commerce and mobile applications. But in the maritime industry, not so much. And should we be funding a research institution to build an AUV for $20 million that we can't scale? Or should we drive, 2 hours down 95 and find an innovative startup company that could build the same thing for $250,000 or $500,000, and you can scale that? You can't scale $20 million. But that's what we've done because they're in the room and they know the funders. We got to do a better job of making sure other people in the room too.
I'm really excited for our social media team to just get all of the excerpts of this because there's so many things where I'm like, I could put a paragraph on that. Awesome questions, Nick. I know we're already a little over time, but I did promise Jerry she could get a question in. So Jerry will be the last one and then we'll wrap up.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I really appreciate it. So this is to both panelists, Jerry and Chris. The state of Florida is experiencing a troublesome variety of problems in each of its diverse aquatic ecosystems. So lakes, rivers, aquifer pollution, red and blue algae blooms are some of these problems. I'm really trying to figure out if ocean monitoring, modernized tech in ocean monitoring can tackle these problems and what will be some of the measurable impacts from that. So this kind of goes back to the communication around innovative solutions and what social impact really means and how to communicate that in an effective way when it comes to tackling some of these modern day problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is that, yeah, I do believe that ocean monitoring and technology will help to tackle those problems. I don't know exactly what the measurable impact would be. I kind of mentioned a second ago that I'm working on this team that's putting together looking at social sciences and ocean observations. And I think maybe having that kind of lens or that kind of perspective would help to identify what that measurable impact would be. And the other thing that I also wanted to mention was the communication aspect that you brought up. Messaging, having that clear message, you have to understand your audience and you have to understand that whole pipeline about from the investor all the way to who's actually using that product and service, and having a clear message from start to end is really important.
Yeah, I think, I think there is a connection between observation and Sherry mentioned earlier, there's someone doing really innovative what he calls 3D farming, other people call vertical farming, but the inclusion of shellfish and seaweed is a massive clearinghouse for algae blooms, as well as just making our waters healthier. And in Europe, one of the first panels that I ever spoke to was a EU-UN joint venture called GSTIC. And one of the biggest wind farm developers, as well as a company called Deming that did the Panama Canal extension, they joined forces off the Netherlands and off Belgium as a way to accelerate offshore wind adoption. And I think the US, certainly on the East Coast, could benefit as well about creating these artificial barrier reefs, how to create 3D farming or vertical farming off of these turbines as a way of bringing back some of the ecological impact that putting these pylons in the ground can create, there's no silver bullet, and none of these solutions, whether going to energy independence or a cure-all, but they shouldn't stop us from innovating and attempting. I mean, a year ago, one of the big arguments about offshore wind was number of bird strikes. And somebody realized that if they painted one of the blades black, it reduced bird strikes by something like 85%. Now, I've lived in New York City. I lived in Baltimore for 10 years prior to that. I've been in New York City for over 20 years. So 30 years, I've been in two big cities. I've never seen one single environmental group talk about bird strikes hitting high rises, ever. But yet it becomes something that is mentioned all the time as something that should, and I'm not suggesting that we should not care about bird strikes. We absolutely should, but that should not stop developing these alternative solutions. And I think often, if we don't have that silver bullet, nothing gets done, or people are not satisfied until their point of view gets completely satisfied. And I think that's the problem with the legislative policies that go on, and innovation and investment overall. In the startup world, you innovate, you put on a product, you have a pricing model, and if it doesn't get adopted by the community, you pivot, and you pivot again. And Facebook looks quite different than when it started, and Microsoft looks quite different. And the business models that they put together to get the fundraising probably don't look anything like what that company does today. And all of that is part of our transformation, and we should adopt that. I think people that adhere to one solution and it can only be done this way, and if it's not perfect, we don't do it, that's nonsense. That is, to me, a hurdle, and you're part of the problem, not part of the solution.
All right, I gotta cut us there just because I know we're already over time, and we want to also make sure you have time to meet our startups and not keep you past dinner. So with that, you guys hang out, startups hang out, but I just want to say for everybody else here, thank you. This is an awesome panel. I've been seeing a lot of great feedback. I want to really quickly just share my screen and let everybody know what's going on our end real quick, and then we'll wrap up. So really quickly, if I can do this, there we go. So if you haven't heard, we have our launch party for our cohort next week in person at Cerveceria La Tropical in Wynwood. Julie is posting the links to all of our stuff that you can follow and join us. But would invite all you guys. It's on the events tab on our website. We are really looking forward to celebrating and meeting some of these people in person. And last but not least, if you're not already following us, there's all the info. But I just want to thank everybody again for coming today. Again, startups hang out. We'll do a little mingling, and we'll be back soon with more events next month, and hopefully see you in person next week. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everyone.